Okay, welcome back to the program, a special edition of Business Morning, live to you from FMDQ, OTC Securities Exchange here in Lagos, Nigeria. Now, this is where it's all happening today, the relaunch of the Interbank FX market in the Nigerian space. 20 years after, we're back on the block, but a lot better, different from where we were 20 years ago in 1986, when Nigeria first introduced the Interbank FX market. As you heard earlier, let's take you quickly back to the last few minutes. A few trade that's been coming through, and again, I got to go to Nigeria and UK is on the same time zone as we speak, so the time has been put together, but of course a bit of disparity here, so we apologize for that. But 10 o'clock Nigerian time, 10 o'clock UK time, 10:34 in the morning here in Lagos, the same thing in the city of London, where Thomson Reuters is putting this all together at the back end, and you can see some of the transactions are coming through. Now, we've seen a few more other trade coming through, consummated deal. We have another at 9:34, just about a minute ago. That's about half, 500,000, $500,000 done at the same price as the first that we saw at 9:10 in the morning. That's at 255 naira to the dollar. So we're going to keep telling you some information we've got from the authorities. Now we're getting this from the central bank that the financial regulator has decided to clear the backlog of the outstanding FX arrears. That will be, that you heard earlier, is about $5 billion US. The central bank just passing this information in, breaking as you have it here on channels, that the central bank will clear the $5 billion through the sports and the futures market. We'll wait to see before the end of the day how much of this amount is coming in through the first day of trading as we kick off this very historic event. So we will keep first on this side of the make studio here to show you how the consummated deals are coming through. Then we got to talk a little bit more here. Now let's get back to the biggest story here. The FX is thus about a part of the entire Nigerian economy. So we need to let's get a bit of a sense of how do all this work together. And a few of the comments that we've had from outside the country over the weekend. The International Monetary Fund says, yes, this was a good step for Nigeria. This is a good way to go. We have Fitch Ratings also saying this is good for the Nigerian banks. This will help a little bit. Where, of course, there could be a little bit of concerns out there. We need to clear that a little bit. Let's bring in Dr. Biodun Adedipe, who is an economist and partner at B. Adedipe and Associates, is live here with us on the program at this time. Let's spend some minutes with him. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate that. You're watching this all the time, and I'm sure you keep your eyes on this as on the broader economy. Give us a sense of what your thoughts are since a week ago when the central bank rolled out this new exchange regime. Looking at the last 20 years, since 1986 to date, give us your thoughts.
Yeah, really, I would say 30 years, actually.
Oh, 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah, 30.
So we're...
Our time flies.
Indeed, indeed. You know, now, what this means simply that we move from one end of the pendulum, which is the fixed exchange rate system, to the other end of it, which is floating rate system. Now, there is the sentiment generally, and it's a global phenomenon, that the market prefers to have more freedom in terms of interaction between the players, rather than have administrative fixing of prices. So the general sentiment, therefore, is that yes, there is freedom now in the market, and so it also means that we have a positive impact on liquidity, no doubt, because we see a lot more of liquidity coming to the market as a result of this. That is sentiment side of it. Now, when you have more liquidity, it then also will translate into funding of transactions. That means the funds will readily be available to fund those transactions, especially given the structure of our economy. But to a large extent, we are still import dependent. So which, of course, now dovetails into the direction of government's policy, which is to ensure that this economy is able to produce more in order to substitute imports, some imports that we can actually substitute, and at the same time promote exports, which are the things stated in this year's budget, okay, the direction of government policy. Now, with the market freed, so to say, it means enhanced liquidity will provide the capacity to pay for imports. And it then means also that if you're able to pay for them, you'll be looking at the pricing of commodities now, looking at the actual price reflected in the market determined rate as different than the official peg that we had, when we also had a dichotomy of official peg and then the roadside rate. Now, which itself also is a problem that creates uncertainty. That is, apart from round tripping, there is always this feeling that who knows whether tomorrow the government will devalue the currency. Now, that particular fear has disappeared with the new direction of FX management policy. So that fear has disappeared. So, but what is now going to happen is that commodities will largely be priced by what people see as the exchange value of the naira produced on this new platform and the market.
One of the things that we're going to go a little bit deeper, we've got about 15-20 minutes with you. One of the things folks are asking in the street since the last couple of days before this morning was, look, at what rate will I buy or sell the dollar if I have $1,000, so just a little as about $5,000? Where do I see the rates? How do I know? Do I go to my banks? How is it going to work out?
Well, as we call you an end user in that instance, end user either as a seller or a buyer. So what we also do simply is to still go to your bank, primarily, because the banks are still the dealers anyway, whether the primary dealers or the secondary dealers. So the banks are still the dealers. So you will still go to your banks, okay? That will do two things for us. Number one is that there will be a process of documentation, so we know what is actually happening in terms of mapping inflows and outflows on the one hand, and then we also will have a good idea of what those monies are being spent on, which means we also know where the money is going into.
Who's buying, who's selling, for what, because there will be documentation.
Exactly. Now, there's also an interesting dimension to it, which will also help this market and the economy significantly, and that is the futures in there. Now, it would mean then that if I have a need for FX in 3 months' time.
Or you're taking a holiday in January.
Exactly.
Or in December.
Exactly. Now, you can now make your request ahead of that need.
Today, for example.
So that means, for example, because this has been a practice among manufacturers mostly. A manufacturer, and this is something I've experienced personally as an analyst, walk up to me and say, look, this is a new year. Where do you expect the exchange value of the naira to go in the course of the year? If you tell me naira is going to lose value, then it pays me to go now to a bank, to borrow money, and buy so much FX in order to place order for my raw materials and other inputs for 9 months production cycle. So now that is something I've experienced as an analyst. So that means that such a manufacturer wouldn't need to go and borrow money in order to buy foreign currencies to now place an order for raw materials.
So he could use
simply
that cash today to do the
buy
other things.
The FX. I mean, he will place an order
he
for
just place an order. He pays for it today. He gets delivery at some point
at the
down
maturity
the line.
date.
Yes.
Precisely. That's the way
that makes interesting. Let's get back.
Okay. Now we take out the demand for such foreign currencies.
The demand pressure
is not necessary now and not required now.
Let's get back to the macroeconomic issues. Again, a few concerns out there about whether once you do this quote-unquote flexible rates or float the rate, then we're coming to a system which you have the government gets a bit of a breather in terms of what is available to it. But again, inflationary pressure.
Oh, by all means, that is something we cannot escape. Because when you float the market, in fact, let's go back to what you mentioned earlier on. 30 years ago, September 26, 1986, when we did exactly the same thing. Now, the official peg was at 2 naira to $1 on that date, when the market opened, okay? But by the day the market closed, that day one, the first day of it, it went to 4 naira, okay? Now, if you map that, that will appear like 100% depreciation. Now, that is depreciation because it was market-driven. So you therefore cannot call it devaluation. So what we are seeing now is not devaluation. People need to also understand that, so that people don't begin to react to that.
And what we're seeing here is the interplay.
Yes, of demand and supply.
Of demand and supply, giving me a rate at any particular point.
That's right. So now, if that rate appears different from what we had at the close of business on Friday, And then you now say, oh, the naira has lost value. What has happened is depreciation, which means that depreciation is a factor of what we all come to the market to demand for and to also supply. So it then means also that the naira has the capability of appreciating if at any point in that market supply exceeds demand. And that is what this arrangement will facilitate. So this helps also in terms of planning. It also helps in terms of forecasting. But one thing is this: we cannot escape the inflationary pressures that this will create for the moment.
In terms of economic planning, and yes, that is one key issue. Look at the budget 2016, 190 97 to the dollar, as far as the exchange rate benchmark. Like we have the oil price.
That's right.
Now we have a new market here that's going to determine things differently for us from today onward. In other words, we've come to the end of the road in which we now have the budget 2017 based on the market-based situation rather than the one that is fixed.
That's right. That is what will happen even for this year's budget. Because as soon as this market opens today, it means from now to the end of the year, everything you see in that budget will be affected by these prices. Which means we cannot run this year's budget with the assumption of 197 naira to $1 any longer from this point. So of course, the impact of that on revenue is that in converting your petrodollar into naira, you will get a lot more naira, okay, given the market-driven rates we are considering now. But at the same time, it will also feature on the expenditure side of the budget, because any item in the expenditure budget that is import-driven will also be impacted. So then it's a matter of doing the sensitivity and impact analysis. Okay, what volume on the revenue side is impacted by the exchange rate, and then what volume on the expenditure side is impacted by the exchange rate. So, but if you look at it, the way it will likely play out is that ultimately, budget 2016 might not be worse off after all.
If by going by what we're going to have today.
Exactly.
Okay, I guess we got to leave it at that. We have days ahead to talk more to you. Thanks for bringing some insight and perspectives into the Dr. Biodun Adedipe from B. Adedipe, an associate and also an economist. We'll be back into, we have the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the programming. We'll get back to how the market is trading. We'll bring you up to speed also with the fixed income market, treasury and bonds. Give us 1 minute. We'll be right back.